Hi guys, welcome back to Hip-Hop ClariTea, where we spill the tea, but we respect the facts. So, today we're diving into one of the most fascinating conversations happening in hip hop right now. Not because of a diss record, not because of a breakup, and not because of who people think is right or wrong, but because it appears we may be watching two completely different healing journeys play out in public. One marriage, one breakup, two people, two very different stages, and maybe two very different outcomes. Let's talk about it. Okay, so recently fans have been paying attention to the music, okay? Particularly Papoose's music. Every time a song drops, listeners immediately begin looking for references to Remy Ma, Eazy the Black Captain, or the events surrounding the breakup. The newest conversation centers around Backdoor, where many fans interpreted the record as another chapter in an ongoing story. Again, that's the fans' interpretation. But the reason people continue making those connections is because this isn't an isolated occurrence. People hear the records, people hear the references, and they connect the dots. Whether that's fair or unfair is another conversation entirely. But that's where the public's conversation is currently living. Now, let's talk about Remy, because she hasn't exactly been silent here these past couple of months. Fans immediately pointed to YFL and the Ever Since I Left You remix, right? What stood out wasn't necessarily anger, it was confidence. Many listeners interpreted the records as saying, you don't know the full story, right? And if I ever decide to tell the full story, things could get uncomfortable. Again, this is fans' interpretation. But what people noticed was the energy, right? The records didn't sound like someone trying to convince people. They sounded like someone warning people not to get too comfortable with their half of the story. Now, let's discuss something that has become impossible to ignore: the visual contrast. Many fans commented that Remy appears happier, lighter, more energetic, more engaged, more present. People talk about her performances, people talk about her smile, they're talking about her confidence. And perhaps the phrase I keep seeing the most often is she's smiling with her eyes. She looks healthy. Now, obviously, we can't diagnose happiness, right? We don't know anybody's private life, but public perception matters. And right now, many fans perceive someone who appears comfortable in her current situation. Now, let's be clear. This is not a diagnosis, and this is not fact, okay? This is simply a discussion based on public observations, okay? But when fans look at Papoose' public messaging, many place him around stage three, which inhabits anger, bitterness, frustration, trying to always prove a point, revisiting old wounds, holding on to unresolved hurt. Meanwhile, fans may place Remy closer to stage six. She's in her reconstruction stage, her building, creating, performing stage. Seems like she's finding new purpose. She's focusing on the future instead of constantly revisiting the past. Again, now, y'all, this isn't facts, this is just observation, okay? But here's where the conversation gets interesting. What if the real story isn't who won, right? What if the real story is how differently people process grief? Because grief isn't always crying. Sometimes grief looks like anger, sometimes grief looks like storytelling, sometimes grief looks like proving your point. And sometimes grief looks like rebuilding your life so loudly that your actions becomes your response. One person may still be processing what happened, while the other may be focused on what happens next. It's the same story, just different chapters. Now, here's where I think the conversation gets deeper, right? And honestly, more important, support systems, okay? Because if you look at the public perception, many fans see a major difference between the support networks surrounding each person. See, when people look at Remy, they often see friends, collaborators, industry peers, women encouraging her. Hell, more men encouraging her. People celebrating her wins. You see community, you see energy, you see a visible village. But on the contrast, when people look at Papoose, they often see a much smaller visible circle. People mention the late great K. Slade because he does, right? People mention Clarissa because she's always talking. People mention when, when they find it relevant to put when in a sentence. But they don't necessarily see the same large support network publicly surrounding him. Again, now, visible support is not the same as actual support. So let's be clear about that. There may be people behind the scenes we don't know about, okay? And, things like that happen. But perception matters, and perception also shapes narratives. And this leads us into something much bigger than hip hop, right? The male loneliness epidemic. One thing researchers and therapists have discussed for years, and that's just now being spoken about openly, is how men and women often leave relationships differently. See, women frequently maintain friendships throughout the relationship. And if they don't, they try to reconnect, right? Women often build emotional support systems. That's what we do. Women often process emotions through conversations. And many men don't. For some men, their spouse becomes their primary emotional support system. And when the marriage ends, the support system disappears. Suddenly, there are few conversations, there's fewer check ins, fewer emotional outlets. And if there isn't a strong type of network waiting on the other side, it can be much harder to process grief in healthy ways. Now, am I saying that's what happened here? No. But it is an interesting lens that you look through when you're seeing fans are actually saying this, right? And believing it, right? Because support actually fuels healing, and isolation can make healing so much harder. And so, another thing worth discussing is how public opinion appears to be changing too. Think about it. A year ago, 2 years ago, the conversation was way different. Many people criticized Remy, and Remy kept their mouth shut. Many people blamed Remy, and Remy kept her mouth shut. Many people believed they knew the entire story, and Papoose and Clarissa allowed it, and Remy still kept her mouth shut. But today the conversation seems more balanced, doesn't it? Some people who were once critical are now praising her resilience, praising her performances, praising her confidence. They're praising how she appears to have continued moving forward despite the public scrutiny, right? Now, that doesn't mean anyone was right or wrong, although, my opinion is biased. In this point, I do think that Papoose was wrong because we've seen him in action. But I'm going to move forward because I'm trying to keep this in a straight and narrow. Okay. But it does simply mean that we've been reevaluating what people thought they knew, right? And I'm just going to say this, and I'm tooting my horn. Yes, I was one of the few platforms that once I went through the receipts, because nothing made sense to me. When things don't make sense, I start looking, right? And I was like, it doesn't make sense that Remy would just go out cheating like that, because Remy never moved. She moves a certain way, right? And not that I know her, but she's one of those ones that move different. So when things were just coming out about her, I was like, that just seems so reckless. It doesn't make sense. And coming to find out, it didn't make sense because it wasn't true. Okay. Now, let's get back to the other situation though. This is where I kind of want to leave everybody, which I already think I know the answer to, but I want to hear your opinion here. Okay. Can two people leave the same marriage but end up in completely different stages of grief? Okay. Can one person still be explaining while the other is rebuilding? Can one person focus on the pain while the other focuses on the future? How about support systems? Can support systems influence how quickly people heal? And could the lack of the support system contribute to why so many men struggle after divorce and separation? Those are the questions that interest me. And I hope you actually comment below as well. This interests me more than picking a winner. And actually, even though I see that a lot more people are on Remy's side, I don't really think this is a win-loss situation. It's a situation where we've seen two people try to bully a narrative that wasn't true. And because of that, it feels as if karma's coming back on them. That, to me, that's what it seems like. That's what it seems. But again, at the end of the day, nobody in this room knows the full story except the people who actually lived it, right? But what we can discuss are patterns. And y'all know I love looking at patterns, okay? Public behavior, the way the music is flowing between the both of them, the interviews, the appearances, and the conversations fans are having, right? The most interesting thing about this story, though, may not be the breakup itself, right? It may be what the breakup reveals about grief, healing, friendship, community, and the very different ways people rebuild their lives after a loss. So tell me what you think. Are we looking at two different stages of grief, or are fans reading too much into the music? I would love for you to drop your thoughts below. And as always, feel responsibly. This has been Hip Hop Clarity.
Hip hop, this is hip hop of the day. I give props to hip hop, so hip hop, hooray! Oh!
Ring a ding ding!